Hey, thanks for tuning in. Really quick, I wanted to have a quick discussion about the difference between a worker and an employee mentality and an owner and a boss mentality. So I got the idea for this video not too long ago after watching a clip of a famous black entrepreneur by the name of Damon Dash. He was on a radio show in New York City and he had a very rich conversation with the co-host about the differences in these mentalities, being a worker and an employee and being a boss and an owner. So in order to illustrate the differences between these two, I wanted to use examples from my own life as to how I've reinforced both the worker and the employee mentality in my life and how I've reinforced the boss and the owner mentality in my life. And hopefully by using personal examples, it'll resonate a little bit more with you if you're watching and you'll be able to relate a little bit more. So how have I reinforced the worker and the employee mentality in my life? I can think of two primary ways that I've done this. Number one, by giving up my labor and my time to generate revenue. Typically, when you work at a job, what you're doing is you're working for either an individual owner or a collective group of owners that own the organization or the company or the corporation, whatever it may be that you're working for. You work for an owner or for that group of owners. You're giving them your labor and your time. They give you money for your services. So that's the number one way that I've done that. I've been a worker or an employee for pretty much my entire life. Number two, after you generate that revenue, you give up your labor and your time and you get that money. What do you spend that money on? Well, anytime that you spend money, you're reinvesting into another owner or another group of owners' product, another group of owners' brand, their trademarks, their creations, their inventions. When you spend money, someone is at the top of that chain profiting off of the money that you just spent. So how do I reinforce the worker and the employee mentality? The money that I'm getting from one owner, essentially I'm reinvesting into another owner, but I'm not reinvesting in myself. That's what that looks like. You make money at a job, you spend money, on someone else's stuff that they own. So how do you switch from being a worker and an employee to a boss and to an owner? Essentially what bosses and owners do is they invest in themselves. It's an abstract concept. You may have heard it before, but what does that actually look like? An example that I can use from my life that I've recently undertaken is some friends of mine, we decided to start a business in stock investing. And what we're doing is we're creating our own brand. We're creating our own logo. We're branding ourselves. We're supporting our own logo by reinvesting the money that we're making from that labor and that time. The revenue we're creating from that labor and that time, we're reinvesting that money in ourselves. Rather than getting paid by one owner and reinvesting in another owner or owners, we're getting paid by that owner. That might be your job, the money that you're making from your job, and we're reinvesting that money in ourselves, into our own brand, into our own company. We're starting a stock investment company, and I'm currently trading individual stocks and options with the focus on blue chip stocks as well as small cap stocks. With the small cap stocks, you have higher volatility, higher returns. With the blue chip stocks, you have a little bit more stability and you have less volatility and the returns are a bit more stable. But regardless, we're learning to invest in ourselves. We're learning to use the money that we're making in other places to multiply by itself. Essentially having money make money for us. And that's really what it's all about. I've been a worker my entire life, been an employee my entire life. And until recently, I made the change to invest in myself and to begin adopting the ownership mentality. So if you currently have a job and you're making money, what are you doing with the revenue and the time that you're giving up? Are you spending it on other companies, other brand names, other products you didn't invent, other products you didn't license, other products that you don't own? Or are you reinvesting that money in your own ideas, into your own companies, on yourself? Really ask yourself that question. And the answer to that question will help you determine whether or not you're on the road to being a boss and an owner, or if you're still a worker and an employee. There's nothing wrong with being a worker or an employee, but don't be a worker unless you're okay with not being a boss. That's something that, I really want to leave you with. Don't be a worker unless you're okay with not being a boss. Bosses don't live orthodox lives. They don't live, 9-to-5 lives, and they don't have normal jobs. Investing in yourself is a process like anything, and you have to be okay with giving up the security of a job and having constant income, in order to be an owner and a boss, But once you brand yourself, once you create your own brand and you find ways to invest in yourself, you'll never be more successful in life. At the top of the Forbes list, you're going to find people that either invest in the stock market or they invest in real estate or they do both. But essentially, they've all invested in themselves. They've all invested in their own brands, and they've all invested in their own, getting their own trademarks and then getting their own creations up off the ground. So that's the difference between a worker and an employee, and a boss and an owner. Workers and employees, they work for an owner, they make money from an owner, and then they spend money on another owner. Bosses and owners, they make money and then they put that money back into their own ideas. So hopefully I was able to illustrate this for you. I hope it's not too long of a video, and really think about, don't be a worker unless you're okay with not being a boss.